to head straight into my talk. And it's all really going to be about telemedicine and how it really, may be changing things significantly. So a little bit about me personally. As Shoshana said, I'm a neurologist and headache specialist in New York City. I graduated from NYU. I completed my residency at NYU. At that point, we did not actually have a fellowship in headache medicine, and I had a fellowship at the famed Jefferson Headache Center in Philadelphia. I subsequently came back to NYU. I'm currently assistant professor of neurology in the division of headache medicine, and I'm also an associate fellowship director. And that's important because a big part of what I do is teach the next generation of neurologists how to be headache specialists. Importantly, I am the medical director of Neura Health, and this is really what we are going to get into at this point. So what is telemedicine in general? I think it's important to just define the term because different things can mean different things to different people. So obviously traditional healthcare is and has always been in-person appointments with a medical practitioner of some kind. You sit down, maybe they do an exam, they get some vital signs, it oftentimes is very helpful and sometimes is not 100% necessary. And telemedicine allows the use of certain kinds of technology, specifically video conferencing technology, to replace a number of aspects of these in-person appointments. So there are advantages and certainly limitations to telehealth. One major advantage to telehealth, and a lot of this was really now driven by the unfortunate coronavirus pandemic, but some advantages to telehealth, which has been made much more available, is the fact that it is much more convenient. Number one, especially if you are remote or far away from a doctor's office, the actual travel that's involved is much less. Oftentimes, you're not sitting in the doctor's office for long periods of time. And then when you're done, you don't have to leave the doctor's office, which can sometimes take a long amount of time. All of that can actually happen before the appointment with relatively expedited check-in, and checkout can be very quick where, setting up the next appointment can also all be done, with technology. Oftentimes, you may live in a place where there really aren't specialists or subspecialists, and it is important sometimes to actually see specialists and subspecialists. And here you can actually have access to these people no matter where you live. Now we'll talk about limitations, obviously, to that as well, and ways potentially of moving around that. Oftentimes, if you're somebody, let's say, who has migraine, especially if you have visual aura, sometimes driving may not be appropriate, especially if you're going while you are not doing well. We wouldn't recommend somebody, driving if they're certainly in the throes of a debilitating migraine attack. And certainly when we talk about safety with regards to COVID, not being in a waiting room of people who are coming from other areas, who are seeing other kinds of doctors also, is definitely an advantage. One advantage to telehealth, and this is actually interesting, is that according to the American Academy of Neurology, the average time to get into a neurologist is 35 days. And oftentimes with telehealth, there are set aside telehealth appointments in many doctors' offices, which actually can be done much sooner. So all of those are major advantages. I don't want to ignore the fact that there definitely are limitations also. For instance, if you are not seeing somebody in person, there may be some things that cannot be done if you're not there in person. As a neurologist, major parts of the neurological exam cannot be done. And those are definitely limitations. I can't, get your reflexes if, I'm not in the room with you. I cannot test your motor strength. It's difficult, although not impossible, but very difficult to test sensation. These are major parts of the neurological exam. One major problem, and this is something that changes all the time, are either insurance or, more important, licensing issues. So the way that traditionally it always has been is that even if your doctor is board certified, they're usually licensed in maybe 1 or 2 states at the most, and it's usually the state that either they trained in or that they are currently practicing in. And if they're lucky, maybe they decided to, keep the old license that they had, when they were training in some other state. And that's usually it. Doctors usually did not get multiple licenses in multiple states because it wasn't necessary. When the COVID pandemic first started its full throes, in March 2020, Congress actually passed a law that allowed the practice of medicine beyond state laws. So normally, let's say somebody who is licensed in New York State, I can't go and open up a practice in, let's say, New Jersey or Connecticut unless I'm actually licensed there. I can't even, theoretically see a person that would be there virtually. The definition of performing, medicine is actually defined as where the patient is rather than where the doctor is. So if not for that law, if not for that legislation, doctors would not be able to see patients unless they were in the state that they're licensed in, especially in areas like New York City, where people live sometimes not too far away from each other, but it could be considered Connecticut or New Jersey, or sometimes even, Pennsylvania. It can be difficult, and that actually made things much, much easier for a long period of time, for at least about a year. Most states, based on federal legislation, allowed the practice of medicine beyond their own state lines. Now, every state is different. Some states do have some reciprocity for virtual appointments. Some only have it for follow-ups, but not for new patient appointments, and some don't have it at all. Many states are teaming up together to allow doctors in one state, for instance, New York and Connecticut, at least right now, allow performance across state lines. New Jersey does not, so you'd actually have to have a doctor in New Jersey to be able to see you, to order tests, to order medications if you're seeing them virtually if you are in New Jersey. One limitation is that technology, especially for people who are not that familiar with it, can be challenging. And this definitely happens. Not all platforms are the same. Some people would say, I've been using Zoom for 2 years. Who doesn't know how to use Zoom? Sometimes it can be complicated. Sometimes you're logging into a different computer than the one that you're used to, or usually you do it on your phone, and it can be complicated. One important limitation is that oftentimes if you do go to your doctor's office, especially when we talk about newer medications, if there are issues getting access to the medication, oftentimes your doctor can say, you know what, I have that in my office, and they can give it to you either during the appointment, a sample, or if, let's say, you've had access to the medication and your insurance changes, or the policy of your insurance changes, these things happen all the time, it's possible to lose lose access to that medication. And if you are seeing somebody far away, that this is definitely a limitation. If it's somebody that's virtual, you won't be able to get that sample. Which is unfortunately sometimes how, with the intricacies of the system and the difficulties of the system that we have right now, can be a necessity for many people. So one important thing to point out is that headache medicine, and truthfully, even before the pandemic, was really an early adopter to telehealth. And one of the reasons why is because there are the vast majority of the patients that we do have are otherwise healthy. There are very specific guidelines, even newer imaging guidelines, for instance, from the American Headache Society that came out about a year and a half ago. There are guidelines with regards to what's considered normal or abnormal, when imaging should be considered, and when it is not necessary. And actually, using telehealth for headache can be very helpful. The vast majority of follow-up appointments, especially if a doctor has an established relationship with a patient, especially if you've seen them maybe once or twice beforehand, you really usually don't get a new neurological exam every time. This is very different than other neurological conditions, let's say multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, or some other neuromuscular disorder where things as part of the neurological exam fluctuate much more. With headache, even if headache fluctuates, it almost never is represented in the actual neurological exam. So, follow-up appointments frequently are done without, a new exam, or at least without an extensive neurological exam. And that actually makes telehealth, a great way of carrying out, follow-up with your headache specialist. The fact that there are so few board-certified headache specialists and so many people with migraine means that access is absolutely essential. And so many of the board-certified headache specialists are located in the same, few metropolitan areas, makes it difficult for people who are not necessarily right there to actually see someone. And having a complicated headache disorder knows no bounds. You don't have to live in New York City or, Chicago or Los Angeles or San Francisco to need, high quality headache care. So, what is it that Neura Health tries to do for telehealth? In general, if there was one sentence to really sum up what Neura Health's ideals are, it's that we aim to provide high quality headache care wherever you are, whenever you need it. And what we try to do is allow people who have migraine and other headache disorders access to high quality headache specialists. And the goal is both to have board certified, like UCNS certified headache specialists, in addition to having people who are neurologists who may not necessarily have had that fellowship experience, but who have gone through our training, where we have our guidelines with regards to medications that are set up based on American Headache Society guidelines, knowing when to order tests, when to refer someone to an in-person neurological exam when that's necessary, knowing the appropriate referrals and having appropriate guidelines. Being able to do this really changes the landscape for access to headache care across the entire country. So right now, it's a little bit like a two-tiered process, only because it takes a lot of time and unfortunately a lot of effort to fully roll out licensing with doctors and with, unfortunately, lawyers, licensing and accreditation everywhere that we can. So in the states where Neura Health is fully available, it basically works like any other headache clinic, where you would see a virtual doctor, where you'd see a neurologist or a headache specialist virtually, and the same way that you may see a doctor at a major medical academic institution, and they may not necessarily be seeing you in person even for that first patient appointment, because now virtual is available. You literally would be able to get everything. If an MRI is necessary, we'll be able to order that. If certain medications are necessary, we can do that. If you need referrals to, either nutrition or PT or, biofeedback or whatever it is, we'll be able to, prescribe and order, etc. For people who are in states And this is changing because the landscape and the laws for every one of these 50 states changes all the time. And we're, on the way of, getting accredited in more and more and more states, week by week and month by month. That's really our goal, to have access everywhere. But in the places where we do not yet have access, what we are able to offer are what we call educational appointments, which basically is still something very similar to the same standard doctor's appointment that you would have if you were to see any headache specialist virtually, a neurological exam virtually, just like you would, in the other instance. We would not be able to order tests. We would not be able to order prescriptions. What we would have to do is communicate all of this with either a local general neurologist, a local primary care doctor, answer any of their questions, and they would be the people that would actually have to do those tests and put those orders in separately. So we work with them, we communicate with them. Many times if they have issues, let's say doing prior authorizations or writing letters of medical necessity, we can do that for you. Certainly it takes the burden off of your primary care doctor or local doctor. So I will kind of leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for me. So thank you very much. Okay, and we do have question number 1. It is for an educational consultation appointment with you. How do you communicate or work with my current headache doctor regarding new ideas or medications? So it's 2 ways. Just like when you would see an in-person doctor, you would the doctor would write up a note and usually a consultation letter to the referring doctor. Similarly, we have the same process. We have the same very standard kind of letter, and we give it to you and we send it to your primary care doctor. And basically, one of the things that we say is, if you do have any questions, reach out to us, and we do make ourselves available for those doctors. And sometimes in consultation, we'll say, this is something that we see as headache specialists, and you may not necessarily see this either as a general neurologist or as a primary care doctor. And even though, let's say, the imaging is normal, we may see changes that are very subtle. And, oftentimes we'll tell, the patients, send us the same, let's say, imaging discs, and we'll see something a little different. So we'll be able to communicate, directly with the primary care doctor. We will tell them why we think what we think. And I think that's a big part of it. We certainly wouldn't want it to be, the kind of situation where, somebody says to a doctor, just order this. It's, you do have to show your clinical understanding, and it should be something that you can, defend, very well. And it's a communication. Obviously, if it's not us that's writing for that medication, and we would want to make sure that the doctor is comfortable and understands what it is that we're doing. Sometimes it is out of our hands, and sometimes we even, if we need to, let's say somebody doesn't have a primary care doctor or general neurologist, we may even refer you to somebody locally and say, tell them that this is a good idea to order and to try out. Perfect. Can we clarify what states we're expected to be licensed in over the next few months? California, Texas, Pennsylvania, and New York are the next slate of states that we hopefully should be rolling out with very soon. Some are much faster than others. So it's all up to the state licensing boards. And, a lot of it is a lot of paperwork, and it's making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and everything. So that's the plan. Once you're licensed in my state, will you be able to start taking insurance? How will the prior approval insurance appeals process work for medical prescriptions? So first and foremost, I actually first want to answer the second part of that question. The question is First, how will prior approval or insurance appeals process work for prescriptions? Because regardless of whether we take insurance for an appointment, the big question is, let's say you're seeing us and it's like a monthly, subscription, which is how Neura Health is right now. We oftentimes everybody really needs to get their medications through their insurance, and we have what we call healthcare headache coaches. They basically are kind of like a concierge, if you are familiar with like a concierge medical practice, somebody who is more than just staff to help organize and order tests. They are people who really try to walk you through the entire process. They're really excellent at getting authorizations. It is a very, very difficult process in the best of circumstances. And oftentimes, insurances, they put up a huge fight. So, we fight the fight, and we appeal, and we do whatever needs to be done. And that's, I think, very important, regardless of how you're going to get it. With regards to taking insurance, that's something that's certainly still, on the table. As of right now, we are not taking insurance, just because, if anything, it oftentimes you don't know how much you're paying until sometimes weeks, sometimes months afterwards. And we want things to be as transparent as possible and as simple as possible. With regards to prescription drugs, for most people, it still is simpler to get it through the insurance that you're paying for and getting that authorization. Oftentimes, doing it that way will be much, much cheaper for you than, paying whatever you're paying on top of the insurance that you're paying for. So we definitely are good at getting authorizations. We are good at going through the appeals process, and, insurance on the table, we will see. Can we do an educational appointment with people in countries outside the United States, or is this just for people in the United States? The truth is, we can do educational appointments for people outside of the United States too. That is not a problem. Do you think that doctors in general are okay with having their patients get a second opinion and getting suggestions for their patients? I think that a lot of patients are nervous about being proactive in this way and are a bit intimidated by their doctors. What would you say to them? What if my neurologist or PCP isn't willing to communicate with my doctor at Neura Health? So I think that it's really great. I think it's a fantastic question. I think that everybody's different. I think that doctors are human and they have their own emotions, and, I'll break it. First, I'll break it down into two options. First of all, as a headache specialist myself, sometimes I will even tell my own patients if I'm, because nobody's a miracle worker, right? Nobody is perfect 100% of the time. Nobody's perfect, and anywhere near 100% of the time. What you do as a neurologist, as a headache specialist, is you try to, your responsibility is to educate yourself as best as you can, and then to apply your best knowledge to the patient's situation. And that doesn't always mean that your best knowledge is whatever the best outcome for the patient is. And oftentimes, even if you're somebody who thinks very outside the box, can be fooled by something, or, haven't tried something, or you didn't try it in the right way. Oftentimes I will refer my patients to my mentors or to colleagues of mine. And, I'll definitely say, is there something that I'm not thinking about? And I think that humility is super important. Not everybody, is okay with that. And first of all, with regards to primary care doctors, often primary care doctors need and will recognize the fact that they're great at primary care, and complicated headache issues can be very complicated. And they may be the first people to say, listen, you need to see a neurologist. They're not supposed to, or their goal really is not to take care of everybody. That's for sure the case. General neurologists, can there be, politics sometimes? I think it's possible. On the other hand, the worst thing is for you to come back to their office and say, I'm not better. And then to come back a couple of months later and say, I'm still not better. And then to come back in a couple of months later and say, I'm still not better. Nobody wants you to not do well. And I think even, if their ego does get hurt a little bit, and I think explaining this kind of situation, shouldn't hopefully, hurt their ego that much. I think that they, in the end, especially if you do better, which is what we want, I think they'll be okay with it. Can it be tricky? Are there some people whose feelings may get hurt? It's always a possibility. Oftentimes patients see me, even though they've seen a general neurologist for years, and they're like, I didn't know that a headache specialist was a thing. So, and it's okay. Oftentimes headaches, general neurologists are interested and they're eager to be educated, and they're like, you know what? That's so interesting. I've never even heard of that diagnosis, or I've seen it in textbooks. I got that question right on the boards, but I've never actually seen it. And for somebody who's a headache specialist, we may see these things much more often. Okay, next question. Is neurohealth appropriate option for somebody who has no neurologist or headache specialist, whose neurologist is MIA and they're in the middle of a flare, or for somebody who's experiencing new symptoms? I think it's a great question. So the first thing, I'll answer the last part of that question first. If you're experiencing new symptoms, there are red flags, and if there's concern that you have that something really bad is happening, I think that it's okay to see somebody virtually, but our answer may be, and don't be disappointed if it is, actually, you may need to get emergent neuroimaging. And oftentimes, if you sign up to see us, and you may even speak to one of our, concierge coaches before you speak to the doctor, because you'll be asking them questions, we may be telling you, we have guidelines, and this is something where you really should probably get checked out emergently. That might mean going to an urgent care and getting a CAT scan. That might mean going to emergency room. That might mean, seeing somebody else in person. And we may be able to actually give you the names of people that may be better to see in person. So new symptoms, red flag. This is different than any other headache that I had, red flag. This is a thunderclap. This is rapid onset. I'm older and I haven't had any headaches before, and here is a headache that I'm starting to have. These are major red flags. I would say specifically for somebody who's experiencing new symptoms, I would be somewhat cautious. I would be somewhat cautious in general. Somebody who sees me and it's an emergency add-on kind of appointment, I always have my antenna up thinking, is this somebody who I need to be very concerned about because something new, something different? That's by definition a red flag. If you don't have a neurologist or headache specialist locally, I don't think it's a problem. If you do have a primary care doctor, I think that would be great. And oftentimes we can, and we have, worked with primary care doctors. It's an issue if a neurologist is MIA and you're in the middle of a flare. I think that, one of the things that I would say is oftentimes we can figure something out that can help you. And sometimes, and I've even told, patients, this, there may be over-the-counter options, or sometimes we have had to say, listen, you've left a couple messages for your neurologist. Let's go back to your PCP. Recommend this. Maybe it's a steroid or something, and there are options. There may be options. So I would say for the first two, if you have no local neurologist or headache specialist, but you have a PCP, I think that's fine. If your neurologist is MIA, I feel very bad for you. But again, PCP I think is fine, okay, and okay. Also, new symptoms, red flag. I've seen a lot of ads for other services in a nutshell. So can you explain how Neura Health is different from something like Cove and Nurx? What is it that Neura Health offers and that they don't offer? Why is it important to see a doctor that's educated in headache medicine? I think that there's some there are other telehealth options, right? Usually telehealth, I would say, the ideal of telehealth is an extension of the doctor's appointment. An extension can be geographically extended. A number of other services, not like to bash or badmouth anything or whatever, but it's fine to have, let's say, like mail order prescription drug services. I mean, there's some conditions where that makes a lot of sense. Migraine, headache disorders, it can be tricky. It can be tricky. If you happen to be somebody who, has what we would call low frequency episodic migraine, you're somebody who has a handful of migraines a year, migraine attacks a year, and what you really need is, the same standard abortive acute medicine a couple of times a year. Then maybe a service like that might be adequate. I mean, honestly, if you don't know what you have, if you're trying to figure out what it is that you have, if you're looking for something beyond just taking a medicine, then you're probably going to want to see a doctor, right? And more than that, seeing a headache specialist, at least somebody who has a want and a need and some additional training and an understanding of, guidelines specifically around headache, to me, that's a game changer, because, there are so many small and subtle things that a doctor can give you that they can do for you that, just getting a prescription drug, mail order service really can't. Sometimes it comes, to doing, peer-to-peer authorizations, right? With and getting, medications through your insurance, which, some of the other services don't do, which, pluses and minuses to that, I guess, how much, that'll cost for you out of pocket. Sometimes it's thinking about workplace accommodations, and sometimes it's, saying, what, I actually think one of the issues, in addition to whatever it is that I'm going to say, is that you need to see a physical therapist. And, maybe there are 2 or 3 stretches that you need to do a couple times a day that'll actually make a real difference. Maybe we need to dig a little bit more into diet or trigger avoidance. And I mean, there's so much more to headache, right? Than take this pill and call me in the morning, right? I mean, it's so, that's what I would say. What we're offering is something comprehensive, and something, where, it's a relationship, just like you'd have a relationship with, a headache specialist that you would see otherwise. So I think that's super important. Great. Next question. When I've tried telemedicine services in the past, I didn't feel as though the doctor read my medical history. Does this work with Neura Health? Is there time on the first consultation to really get a good overview of my case plus possible suggestions? I think so. First of all, one thing I'll definitely say is, in the current medical system, the current landscape of how medicine is practiced, doctors really, especially in the corporate medical landscape or whatever, doctors sometimes can feel very stressed and pushed, and you have to just go from one to the other, and for our doctors, we really try to factor in time even in between patients, because you may have to make phone calls, right? You may have to document or order something or write a letter, and we try to factor that in for the doctors also, and compensate them for that time, not just for the time that they're seeing patients, which makes a big difference. We try to factor that time before the appointment in also. So there's always, a buffer before and after the appointment, and that allows the doctor to go through your medical information. We have a fairly comprehensive intake form. It's based off of the intake forms from a number of academic institutions, some that I've worked at, and others that other people have. And I think that it gives the doctors, before they see you, a really good indication of what's going on. I always say that even looking at the intake form is not as good as listening to the way that the patient describes their own journey. There are only so many things that you can see on a, on a form anyway. And even if, we leave a lot of room for you to say, what else would you like to tell the doctor, which is always like the last question on these forms. There's a lot to say a lot of times. And sometimes you don't even know the best way to describe it. And it's our job to get that out of you. I do think that you should have an adequate amount of time to spend with the doctor and to go through recommendations and to get a neurological exam also, and for it to not feel rushed. I think that's very important. It's definitely our goal to, set up an environment where where we are able to do it. We want things to be done obviously in as safe of a process as possible. We want to get as much of your history. We wouldn't want to prescribe something that you've been on, or that you had a bad reaction to, or something that's related to something that you had a bad issue with. And I think that that's something that we focus on, and we definitely want we definitely want to make sure that you feel that you have enough time with us. Okay, perfect. When I've tried, perfect. With Neura Health, as you add more doctors, how would I be assigned to a doctor's do I choose? That's a very good question. Is it based on case complexity? Am I able to be changed to a new doctor if my first one is unable to help, or my case is more complex than originally thought? We're very flexible. And in general, what I would say is, we would still want to work on a two-tier system, but a little different than like educational versus a full appointment. Ideally, when everything becomes available, what we would want, everything available everywhere, what we would want is for people who do have a more complicated history, who have a higher frequency of headache attacks, whether it's migraine or cluster or whatever. Some people who have like I was saying, multiple medication trials, or medication intolerances, or other comorbidities, other medical issues. We would want somebody like that definitely to see a headache specialist, and somebody who has lower frequency migraine, somebody who has moderate frequency migraine, somebody who wants to be educated, and somebody who really is at square one. Somebody like that can definitely see a general neurologist who is interested in headache, and understands the guidelines, has a good sense of what medications to prescribe and what not to in appropriate clinical circumstances. So, and it, certainly if it becomes apparent that your situation is more complicated, the goal is not, to puff up the doctor's egos, and it's nothing against the doctor, sometimes you have to understand your own limitations, and we have board certified headache specialists for a reason. So yes to this. I say that you have a long onboarding form for me to complete when I sign up for Neura Health. Is this where I enter all of my past and current medications and health history? Is it important for me to complete the entire form, and how much of my history do you need to know? Is it helpful for me to send current questions ahead of time before my appointment to the doctor concierge service, or is that not necessary or feasible? The answer that I would say is I would say put as much information over there as possible, because it is a very easy way for the doctor to review as much of your medical history as possible. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll know everything immediately, because I'll tell you the truth. How many of us have looked, have gone through, it's long for the doctor, too. And, sometimes you'll look through a form, and by the time you're done with it, you're like, you have a vague, memory of it. It stays in our medical, in our charts and everything, which is helpful. And, it's not going to go, anywhere. As a doctor, sometimes, I'll be looking, at my it's a paper intake form at NYU, and I'll be looking at it, and as I'm talking to the patient, I'll realize I made a silly mistake because I referenced a medication that they had mentioned either to me before or on the form that they took, and that that you didn't agree with them, or and I wouldn't have remembered that. Everyone has little things that they forget sometimes also. So no intake form is ever perfect, but I think that including as much information there as possible is what's most helpful, and it sets the stage. I think that if the doctor knows more information about you beforehand, it expedites things a little bit. It definitely helps us know all the medications that you've been on, because this way I'm not having to necessarily ask that question. And what I can do is I can say, okay, I saw that you were on topiramate. Tell me what that was like. So that's pretty much how that would go with the intake form. Specifically with regards to questions ahead of time, you can. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. One thing I would say is the doctor's not going to, at the end of the appointment, after we've gone through the history and the neurological exam, the doctor may not necessarily remember the questions that you asked at the end of the intake form. So I would definitely say, even if you put them there, which is fine, ask them, because it's not going to be at the top of the doctor's mind, for sure. Will I be sent a written report of my appointments with the doctor after my visit? Yes, and importantly, a summary that where we try to not use jargon, and we try to explain what it is that we think that you have, why we are making the recommendations that we are. I think that's very helpful also if we're trying to communicate with one of your doctors. I think it's super important for them to know, like I was saying before, why is it that we're telling them to prescribe whatever medication or test. Would Neura Health be able to help me put together a written urgent or emergency plan for those times that my abortive acute medications do not work? Maybe something that can help me figure out how to stay out of the ER, as well as something I can show my local urgent care or emergency room for treatment suggestions. Absolutely. I mean, our goal as headache specialists is definitely to help you avoid being in an emergency room. It's literally the worst place for somebody who has, any headache disorder. Absolutely. It's smelly, it's loud, it's bright. I mean, to be brutally honest, as a neurologist, I try to stay away from these places too. Sometimes they consult us and we have to go, but it's not my favorite place to be. I guarantee you it is not going to be your favorite place to be. And when I was referencing before, if there are red flags, we may be sending you to get some kind of emergency test done, not because we're like trying to wash our hands of you. It's literally because this, as per guidelines from the medical societies, American Headache Society, the American Academy of Neurology, as per guidelines, you deserve getting this emergency test done. So it's not like it's something that we want to do. And certainly with regards to acute and abortive options, putting together an action plan, I think, is essential. I think it's very, very important, especially when situations are complicated. There are sometimes people who have such frequent migraine attacks that they need to sometimes alternate acute medications, not getting into like medication overuse or anything over here, but that is necessary sometimes. And it's in that kind of situation very important to know, when am I using this? When am I using that? When can I use them together? And what to do if all else fails. There are some people where it's the opposite, where it's not necessarily based on frequency. It can be based on severity, or what we call refractoriness of the migraine. So it could be that your migraine attacks don't respond to multiple kinds of medicines. You could be somebody, you take a triptan and it's like, a sugar pill, it doesn't do anything for you. And you take, I don't know, something stronger, dihydroergotamine, and it doesn't do that much for you. And, you could be somebody who, has a really difficult to treat individual attack. So absolutely, our goal is to get you to stay out of the emergency room. Our goal would be to come up with an appropriate migraine action plan for you. That's definitely the case. How helpful is it for us to use your or any other headache diary in preparation for an upcoming appointment? It's really helpful. It really, really, really is. One thing I would say that I tell, I don't know, almost a lot of my patients, I say, if not all, then just about all, I say it's really essential to calendar your headache attacks. And, again, it's a different kind of process for different people. You might be somebody who the purpose of recording the attacks is to figure out what kinds of associated triggers might be going on, right? So that's very different than somebody who has, let's say, new daily persistent headache, or, chronic migraine where you have, something at baseline all the time. And over there, I'm telling you, don't say whether you've had an attack as much as it is, how are things fluctuating? What is your, pain number, pain scale number on a day-to-day basis? What's that like at that point? That could be, very different than somebody who, we're looking at the number of attacks that they have per month. We're starting a new preventive medication, and we're telling them, let's see over the course of the next 6 weeks or 12 weeks, if the migraine frequency decreases, right? There are advantages to using a calendar, a diary, in all of these different circumstances. What we've tried to develop with our tracker is something that hopefully can fulfill as much of those roles as possible. There are a lot of trackers. There's always the old-fashioned, I print out, a calendar once a month, and I write an X every time, I experience a migraine. Something, the first thing I would say is something is definitely better than nothing. And I do think that, we've tried to make it relatively easy to use and relatively, comprehensive. So I think it's very important, even in preparation, even if you're waiting 2 days and you're like, oh, do I really have to, put those headaches down? I think it's helpful also because, you have to get used to it. So what happens if I have urgent questions in between my doctor visit at Neura Health? Is there a way for me to ask questions and get responses? Yes. The answer is yes. Your coach, your concierge person is somebody that you can ask all questions to, and they get in touch with the doctors as quickly as they need to, especially for clinical questions, right? So there are questions where you need a doctor, and there are questions where you might not necessarily need a doctor. For instance, your question might be something like, where can I get more information on menstrual migraine? And your concierge might tell you, what, we actually have some great blog posts on there. And we have some of our, medical advisors who have actually written pretty extensively, on some of these topics. And, we can give you a lot of really great information, either from our own, library of articles, or from other great sources, American Migraine Foundation, etc. Right? And there are other questions like, hey, can you find me a nutritionist that's close to me? I'm looking for a new PCP because my PCP is not answering my calls, or really doesn't want to work with you guys, or whatever it is. And 100%, we can help with all of those things. And then any clinical issue, we get in touch with the doctors right away. Our goal is to be able to answer as the questions quickly. That's definitely the goal. So can you help explain the following about Neura Health? pricing, structure, and cost, exactly what we get for the subscription fee, how long it takes to get the first doctor's appointment, what happens if we want an extra doctor's appointment, can we cancel at any time, or are we locked in for a minimum of time, such as a year? So pricing, structure, and cost. $1 for the first week, $28 a month afterwards. It's a subscription. What you get for it is you get a tracker. You get tons of great information. You get what we call like 90 days of neuro, which is where we, have certain blog posts and little things that are written by myself and a number of different other experts that give you little tidbits every day about migraine, about different topics in migraine. How long does it, and you have 24/7, access to this coach. We have built this library. We're building even more. So we have right now nutritionists and physical therapists that are also building specific tracks to allow our coaches to actually kind of guide you through specific fields within neurology. So, with things that are non-medical that could actually really, really help. So for instance, if, you speak to one of the headache specialists and they say, I actually think that in addition to whatever it is that I'm saying, spending a little bit of time doing, let's say, certain exercises for your neck and your shoulders, that could be really helpful. We have, 3 specific tracks of exercises, and we are going to, have ones that are specific for, let's say, somebody, who needs posture training, somebody who, is very tense otherwise, somebody else who, has, tender points all around the back of their head. And, we're able to come up with a specific, set of exercises that could really help you. So you have access to all of this, a check-in with your coach, which is the next thing that we're rolling out, which is, once a week, you just check in and you say, what's going well, what isn't, what needs to, what are things that we can do for you better. So it's a fair amount. And it's 24/7 access to the coach, who has access to the doctor, and will get all of your questions answered as quickly as possible. So that's pretty much what you get. How long does it take to get the first doctor's appointment? We say 2 to 3 days. I mean, we're pretty good at that. So fast, is the answer. What happens if you want an extra doctor's appointment? So, over the course of a year, the doctor's appointments quarterly are included. Anything extra, I think, is $50, which, I mean, for a doctor's appointment is what some copays cost. I think that's what my copay costs for specialists at my own hospital. So, that's how that is. What happens if can we cancel at any time? Or you're locked in for a year? I think you're locked for like that month that you pay. I think that's it. It's not like, you pay monthly, but it's like $1,000 because it's, like X number of months altogether. That's not what we do. So anyway, that is Neura Health, and that is telehealth. And again, I definitely want to, thank Shoshana and Anna at Migraine Meanderings. We're going to close this out for today. I want to thank you, so much for being with us. I hope that you found this helpful. If you have any comments or questions that haven't been answered, which definitely happens, and happens all the time, anytime, you can be sitting there talking to the doctor for like an hour, and then as you're walking out the door, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot that question. That was like the most important question that I had. So if you do have any comments or questions, that haven't been answered live, and we try to answer as many as possible, please, ask questions in the comments over here. Super helpful. Migraine is such a challenging disease to live with. We encourage you to explore all of the patient resources that are offered on Migraine Meanderings. We encourage you to proactively partner with your doctors, explore telehealth as an option, and let us know if Neura Health works for you. So thank you so much, and I will leave it at that.